Well, God bless you. Welcome to our channel. I believe God brought you here today because God has a word for you. You're not here by mistake. You're here by the divine providence of God because God brought you here because God has a message that will change your life. So right now, open your ears, open your mind, open your heart, and receive this wonderful word from God. You all know during the Lenten season, we've been preaching and teaching together a sermon series called Get in Shape. Like I told you all in the beginning, the sermon series was inspired by a book I was reading by a gentleman by the name of Eric Reese, and that book is called Shape, Finding and Fulfilling Your Unique Purpose for Life. And I told you, when we talk about getting in shape during this Lenten season, it's not about our physical, although I want our physical to be in shape, and I want us to be in the best health we can. I believe that if we're in the best spiritual shape possible, that we will be able to change the world, change our lives, and change outcomes for the future. So over the last couple of weeks, we've been preaching and teaching about a multitude of things. We started off with the S in shape, which are spiritual gifts. We wanted to learn what our spiritual gifts were and how to apply them. Last week, we talked about the heart, making sure that our heart health is good because everything that we do flows from our heart. This week we move into the A of shape, and the A in shape simply is your abilities. So this week my sermon is simply called You're Able. As a matter of fact, I want you to write that in the comments. Let's start early. Write it down. I want you to get this sermon topic in your heart and in your mind. You're able. I want you to understand. I told you I want us to get in shape because you move different when you're in shape. You act different when you're in shape. You live different when you're in shape. You know, I've been in better, I'm just talking about physical shape right now. You know, when you're in better physical shape, you walk more upright, you have better posture, you like looking at yourself in the mirror because you like what you're beginning to see. And the same thing happens with spiritual shape. It is when we are in shape that we are most prepared to do the most exciting things. It's when we're in shape that we're most prepared to attack life and make the changes that we need to make for us and see changes that are made in the world. I believe that if we get in shape during this Lenten season, continue to stay in shape after this Lenten season, that we will be able to change the world. But I want you to know something. The difficulty with changing the world is that many of us often suffer from doubt. One of the most crippling things that people suffer from is doubt. Many of us don't live the lives that we can and that God has created us to live simply because we don't think we can. Henry Ford famously said, "Whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you are absolutely right." No matter who you are, the difference between what you can do and what you can't do is whether you think you can or not. And I want you to understand, many of us don't think we can because we don't think we're able. And I want you to know that God created all of us able. God created all of us with abilities. God created all of us with talent. And God has called us to change the world and given us the ability to do so, but we have to believe that we are able. Write it down in the comments, I'm able. I want you to know when you begin to see yourself as able, you'll begin to know that you're a victor, not a victim. When you see yourself as able, you'll be able to see yourself as doing, not having things done to you. When you see yourself as able, you'll begin to see yourself how God sees you and how God has seen you from the beginning. I want you to know from the beginning, God has had a plan for your life. God gave you gifts. God gave you abilities. God gave you spiritual gifts. He gave you a heart, and He's given you the ability to move forward and do His work, His will, and His way as a part of His plan. And God knew what He was giving you from the beginning. Look what the Bible tells us in the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah chapter 1, verses 4 through 8 simply read as follows. The word of the Lord came to me saying, this is Jeremiah. The word of the Lord came to me saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Alas, sovereign Lord, I said, I do not know how to speak. I'm too young. But the Lord said to me, do not say I'm too young. You must go to everyone I send you to and say whatever I command you. Don't be afraid of them, for I am with you and will rescue you, declares the Lord. Look at what we've got here. We've got a young Jeremiah, and the Lord has come to him and said, Jeremiah, I want you to understand, I have set you apart for some things. I want all of you to understand who are watching today, the Lord has put you here for a reason. Write it down in the comments, I'm here for a reason. I want you to know your life is not random, your life is not a mistake, and your life is not arbitrary. God put you here for a reason. God put you on this earth for a reason. God put you at your job for a reason. God put you at your school for a reason. And you're watching this broadcast right now for a reason. Whether you're watching it today or whether you're watching it 10 years from now because you stumbled upon it in the middle of the night, God has you here for a reason. God doesn't work without reason. God doesn't work without intention. And God wants you to understand you're here for a reason. God comes to Jeremiah and tells Jeremiah from the beginning, I know who you are, I've set you apart, and I've given you a job. God is not going to know you, set you apart, and give you a job that you're not able to do. You are able to do what God has put in your heart. You are able to do what God is calling you to. You are able to do what God has assigned you to. But here's the problem. Most of us have the same response Jeremiah did. And here's the challenge. Let me tell you. The bigger the thing God is calling you to, the more dangerous this response can be. Look what Jeremiah says. Alas, sovereign Lord, I don't know how to speak and I'm too young. Notice, God tells Jeremiah, I've got a plan, I've set you apart, you've got ability, there's a thing for you to do. And Jeremiah's response is not, let's go, it's, no, I don't. Jeremiah starts to excuse himself from his destiny because he doesn't believe what God is saying. Can I let you in on something? Sometimes the fact that you don't believe what God is saying is how you know it's God. Because here's the thing, if it's something you could see, if it's something you thought would be easy, if it's something that you thought you could handle, something you thought you could accomplish, then you wouldn't need God for it. Sometimes the proof that it's God is that it's too big for you. But here's the problem. If God said it, it's not too big for you. You just got to grow into it. Write it down in the comments. I'm growing into it. There are going to be things in life that you got to grow into. There's going to be anointing on your life that you got to grow into. There's going to be promises on your life that you got to grow into. You're not ready for everything, but you can grow into it because you're able. But too many of us take the Jeremiah approach and we say, not me. How many of you right now are living like Jeremiah? How many of you right now are gifted, blessed, able, but acting like you're not? Or thinking that you're not? Or in positions where you're just not sure that you should be there? If you're there, baby, God has you there. The Bible tells us all promotion comes from God. And what you're suffering from is called Imposter Syndrome. Psychologist Arlen Koenig defines imposter syndrome as an internal experience of believing that you are not as competent as others perceive you to be. While this definition is usually narrowly applied to intelligence and achievement, it also links to perfectionism and how we act in social contexts. To put it simply, imposter syndrome is the experience of feeling like a phony. You feel as though at any moment you're going to be found out as a fraud, like you don't belong where you are not capable of what you're doing, and that you're only here and making it by dumb luck. It can affect anyone, no matter their social status, work background, skill level, degree, expertise, or experience. And I want you to understand, too many of us are suffering from imposter syndrome because we don't believe we are who God made us to be. We don't believe we're as good as God has made us. We don't believe we're as capable as God has made us, because we're walking around saying, it can't be me. And God sent me today to tell you, yes, it can. It can be you. And not only can it be you, it is you, but you've got to accept it. And too many times, if we're honest, we won't accept what God has already done. You're already there. You're already ready. You're already able, but you're talking yourself out of it. And the danger of imposter syndrome is that it will stop you from living up to your God-given purpose, your God-given calling, and the ability that God has put in you simply because you don't think you are able. And I want you to know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, beyond any question, and beyond any doubt, you are able to do what God has created you to do. And here's the thing. Each of us gets different abilities. Each of us is able to do something different. If you do a tour through the Bible, you will find that God gave everybody abilities, big and small, according, watch this, to what they would have to do. Look at this. Samson, strong. Samson was going to have to knock down pillars and beat down Philistines. Samson was strong. Solomon, wise. Solomon was the wisest man to ever walk the earth. He was going to have to lead Israel into the next chapter of existence. So God gave him wisdom. Joseph from Genesis, he could budget like nobody else. How do we know? Because the Bible tells us that when Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dream, he figured out how to budget so that Egypt would have for now and have during a famine. Daniel was able to interpret dreams that nobody else could understand. Apollos from the New Testament, God gave him the ability to preach and preach the word so that others would follow and hear. David was not only a king, David was a king, David was a writer, David was a musician, and David could fight like nobody else. The Bible tells us that not only did he kill Goliath, but the women sang his psalm saying that Saul has killed 1,000, but David has killed 10,000. Moses was a shepherd who became a leader. Esther saved her people by throwing one heck of a dinner party. I want you to understand, whether it's big or small, we all have something that God has blessed us with, so don't underestimate the ability that God has given you. God gives us big and small to accomplish all that he's doing. Romans chapter 8 verse 28 tells us, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love God and to them who are called according to his purpose. Listen, no ability is too big, no ability is too small. You may think that what you're able to do doesn't matter. You may think that what you're able to do is not significant. What I want you to understand is, if you can throw a good party, that's significant because you can throw parties for the Lord. If you can just give a person a word of encouragement, that's not insignificant because you may be the person that picks them up and helps them stay away from something. No matter what you can do, God has given you the ability for it all to work together according to what he's called us and purposed us to do. So you got to do this. Use what you got. Write it down in the comments. Use what you got. You got to use what you have. You have to use what's available, because when you use yours and I use mine and he uses his and she uses her, we become those who God has strung together to change the world. Steve Jobs famously said, the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. You've got to understand, your ability will help you change the world for God, even when it's a little thing. I want you to know, y'all remember Sunday school? We used to sing a little song, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Now, as we all know, my ability is not singing. But here's the thing. You bring your ability. I bring my ability. We all bring our abilities, and it becomes a tapestry of ability that moves God's kingdom forward. But only, watch this, if you believe. Because here's the thing. You can be blessed, you can be able, and you can not be believing and walking around full of doubt. Believing in your God-given abilities can be the difference between you fulfilling your destiny and you missing your destiny. The difference between you and the destiny that God has for you is believing God that he made you for something. and believing in you. Two things here. You have to believe God. You have to take God at his word. When God says that he has made all of us with a gift, when God says that all of it is going to work together, when God says that you are a masterpiece, you have to believe God. And I know what some of you are saying. You don't understand what I've been through. You don't understand what I've seen. If God made me for a purpose, why have I gone through all of this? Here's my answer. It's not why have I gone through all of this. Your proof that God made you for a purpose is that you're still here. Your proof that God made you for a purpose is that you're still here, that you still have opportunities, that you still have chances. You got to believe that God knew what he was doing when he made you, because you're able to contribute to what God has going in the world. But it's not enough to believe God. You got to believe in you. You have to believe that you can. You have to believe that you have the ability. Living up to your abilities, living up to what God has created you to do, will require three things from you. You have to remember, you have to believe, and you have to act. Let me show you. One verse of scripture for today, and we're going to dig at it. Numbers chapter 13, verse 30, simply says this. But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. I want you to understand, Caleb was one of the 12 spies that was sent into the promised land before the people of Israel crossed over into the promised land. Now, when they go over to the promised land, the Bible tells us that they find this place that is exactly as God described it would be. They find this place where the streets are flowing with milk and honey, where there's grapes so big that it takes 2-3 people to carry them. They've all been there. Now, Caleb is one of 12 spies that goes. But 10 spies come and say they can't do it. They come back and say, the land will devour us. The people there are like giants, and we're grasshoppers in their sight. But Caleb quiets them down and says, look, we're well able to do this. Now, here's the question. Caleb had the same experience, but he had a different perspective than the other folk who went. And my question has always been, what made Caleb different? Here's your answer. Caleb was making a statement of faith. Caleb was stating what he believed. Let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. Caleb's statement of faith did three things. It had him remember what God said, believe what God said, and act on what God said. And I want you to understand, if you're going to go where God has for you to go, you've got to remember what God said to you, believe what God said to you, and act on what God said to you. Caleb remembered that God had told them earlier. God had told them in the book of Leviticus, keep all my decrees and laws and follow them, so that the land where I am bringing you to live may not vomit you out. You must not live according to the customs of the nations I'm going to drive out before you, because they did all these things and I abhorred them. But I say to you, you will possess their land. I will give it to you as an inheritance, a land flowing with milk and honey. I am the Lord your God, who has sent you apart from the nations. Here it is. Caleb remembered everything God said. Notice, the folk who said the land devours their people. Now, notice God tells them ahead of time, you can go in there and you must not live according to the customs of the nations I'm bringing before you, because they did these things and I abhorred them. You will possess the land and I will give it to you. Be clear. Caleb remembers that God said, I'm going to give it to you. They remember that the land that God is bringing them into may vomit will vomit you out. In other words, it will devour you and spit you back out. That's what they remember. Caleb remembers the promise based on what God said to do. Keep my decrees and I got this. I want you to write it down. God's got this. When you keep God's decrees, you can know that you're able because God will do exactly what he promised to do. The Bible says he promised that he would give you the land. It would be an inheritance. It would be great, and that he was going to set you apart. I want you to understand that Caleb was able to make a statement of faith because he remembered everything God said. Too many times, we remember God's warnings and forget God's blessings. You've got to remember everything that God said to you. Yes, God said be careful. Yes, God said follow his command. But God also said he'd never leave you or forsake you. God also said he'd always be there. God also said he'd heal you. God also said he'd deliver you. You've got to understand that your abilities have to come from the place of belief that God is a God of his word. And you got to believe what God said. Caleb said, look, we are able. We're up to the task because God has already made a promise. Be clear. He believed they could do it after he remembered what God said. Notice, he said, we are, watch this, I want to quote it exactly, well able. In other words, we are more than enough. I want to tell somebody right now, God has gifted you with abilities that are more than enough. They're more than enough for your job. They're more than enough for your school. They're more than enough for the challenges that you're facing. Don't sit there wondering if you can make it. You got to walk forward knowing that you can make it. You got to walk forward knowing that you are well able, not kind of able, not sort of able. You are well able because God has already blessed you. God has already promised to you. God has already made a way. You just got to walk in what God has already said, but you can't do what you don't believe you can do. Doesn't matter what it is. If you don't believe you can do it, you will self-sabotage it. If you don't believe you can do it, you will mess it up, even though it's completely in your power. Well able means that we're more than up to the task because God has created a way. I want somebody out there to know that's wondering, how am I going to get through this? How am I going to get past this? Maybe you're wondering about going back to school. Maybe you're wondering about starting a business. Maybe you're wondering about your new position at work. Maybe you're wondering about getting a new job. I want you to know God has gifted you. God has blessed you, and you are well able. Well, let me take it a step further. You are well able to raise your kids. You are well able to keep your marriage together. You are well able to live fruitfully, successfully, and fulfilled as a single person. You are well able. God has given you the ability to face what you're dealing with, conquer what you're dealing with, and move on to the destiny that God has promised you. You are well able. Write it down. I'm well able. You're more than up to the task. You're more than enough. But here's the thing. Once you remember, once you believe, you have to do. And that's the one that gets a lot of us. You have to start doing what you remember God calling you to. Doing what you believe God calling you to. And for a lot of us, let's just be honest. Time, space, experience, they pull the doing out of us. We start saying, I'll get to it one day. We start saying, one time down the road. We start saying, when I get all my ducks in order. I want you to understand that you will never walk into the destiny that God has for you until you start actually walking in it. You will never walk in who God has called you to be until you start acting in it. You will never be all that God has purposed you to be until you start acting in it. Notice what Caleb says. Let us go up at once. Here it is. Not tomorrow. Not 30 days from now. Not when we get our ducks in order. Not when we get down the way. Right now, we got to do something. And I believe that God is sending me right now to tell somebody that's watching, you got to do something. What God has put on your heart that you have been putting off, God has sent me to remind you what he said, tell you got to believe him at his word, and now you got to do something because you are well able. You're not waiting on new talents. You're not waiting on new abilities. It's some of it, you don't even have to go back to school. You just got to go do it. And too many of us, we don't want to do it because we're afraid we'll fail. But what if you don't? What if you succeed? What if it works? What if God was telling the truth? What if you're able to do this and then some? What if all God was waiting for you to do was get started? Romans chapter 8, verse 37 says, now in all these things, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. My brother, my sister, it's time to get in gear. You are able, but now it's time to act. It's time to put your faith and your belief in motion. It's time to stop looking at the worst case scenario and start believing for what God has promised. Because you can believe it, but do you really believe it until you act on it? My brother, my sister, you're able. You got the goods. I want you to know right now, I'm telling you, looking you in your eyes, you've got the goods. You can do this, but you got to get going. Remember what God told you. Take him at his word, and now act on the abilities that God has given you, and you will be a part of changing the world. My brother, my sister, you're able. Now get going with what God's given you the ability to do. Thank you for joining us today. We're so excited that you were with us. Listen, if this sermon had an impact on you, maybe it's made you want to get a little bit closer to God. If you want to be saved, or if you want information about joining the church, or if you just need special prayer, please go to our website, www.stpauloxonhill.org, and under Contact Us, there'll be an option for you. We want you to reach out to us so we can reach back out to you. We value your time. We value that you've been here, but we want to bless you with salvation, church membership, or prayer. Just let us know what you need, and we'll reach back out to you. Listen, be a part of the St. Paul fam. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram so that you can know everything that's going on in the church. We don't ever want you to be without. So make sure that you're a part and an active part of the St. Paul fam by joining us on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Listen, if you want to support our ministry here, every dollar counts. We appreciate your faithful financial support. To donate to us and to help us spread the gospel far and wide and do ministry in the community, just go to our website, www.stpauloxonhill.org/give. And there, please, make the best gift that you can. We appreciate every dollar that you send. Thank you for joining us. This has been a blessed week. We hope it's been a blessing to you. Now, join us for the Williams Weekly Challenge. The Word of God tells us not only be hearers of the Word, but also doers of the Word. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever thought about what you're able to do? This is what I want you to realize. God has given all of us abilities. Now, we can often downplay our abilities and think that it's not enough, or think that it's not a lot. But I'll tell you this much. Everything that God has given us the ability to do is something that is valuable, something that's worthwhile, and something that's a part of God's plan. So this week, I want you to do three things. Remember that God has blessed you. Know that you're able. And then three, put what God has given you to work. If you'll put it to work, God will bless what you've done, and you'll be a blessing to somebody else. God bless you. I love you, and we'll see you next time.